Hendry here, who's joined us this evening. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff. We're going to talk about coaching. Speaking to Sean Murphy last week, guys, and Sean did nothing but talk about this man. All he did was talk about him. He praised him all evening. You know, every 20 minutes, Chris Hendry this, Chris Hendry that, Chris has done, oh, no, I know. I thought, I have to get him on. We have to get him on. So here we are. And we've got them on himself, Chris Hendry. Thanks for joining us.
Absolute pleasure, Dave. Great to be with you.
No, it's great to speak to you. I mean, I've always promised the guys here that we were going to get some form of coach on. You know, there was talk of this person and that person without going into any names, and then there was talk of some of the guys. But, you know, we've got the main guy on here. We've got number one on here. We're going to talk about some things this evening. We're going to talk about what this guy does for the players, you know. But we're going to start with you anyway, Chris. Just give us a little bit of background about yourself. I know you were a player, so start from there and tell us a little bit how you got into all this.
Okay, I was born in East Lancashire, a little village called Worley. Grew up in a little town called Accrington, the home of Riley snooker back then, all those years ago. And basically, Dave, I've been very fortunate to be good at different sports. I've been a football player. I play tennis. I can play golf to a decent level. Obviously, play snooker to a decent level as well. I would say that probably football was my best sport, and I was a Lancashire schoolboys player. Brought into Blackburn Rovers as an apprentice. Northern English tennis champion. Won all the local snooker tournaments. Observer Cup. County badminton player. One of these guys that pretty decent at lots of things, but unless you actually commit to one of those things and make a decision to focus in, you're never really going to make it as a professional. And that was one of my issues. I enjoyed too many different things. I also had a couple of businesses as well. But anyway, going back to growing up in Accrington, went to local schools, left school at 16, had a few jobs, played a lot of snooker then as well from 16 onwards. And things started to develop. Won a tournament out in Holland, live on TV. I think I mentioned that to you before. I got onto a final situation where it was televised all over Europe, and I wondered why, compared to the semi-final where I was playing very, very well, making 1 or 2 century breaks, got it to the final, which was televised, couldn't literally hold my cue. I was that nervous, and that is the moment that happened. It fascinated me because I wanted to understand what was going on. Why was I playing literally a couple of hours previous fantastic snooker, and now I'm live on TV because it's the final? I can't pot a ball for the first 2 frames. It was that dramatic, and obviously it has to be all inside here. So I wanted to understand why that was, and that led me down the path, having spent about 17 years with a guy called Frank Callan, who was known as the Guru. He was in Blackpool, and I learned a lot of things from Frank. He was a brilliant coach, very direct coach, no bull, straight down the line, fishmonger from Fleetwood. What do you expect? And he fascinated me. His approach was different. He wasn't an official coach, but he was coaching Steve Davis in the 80s, coaching Stephen Hendry in the 90s. So he obviously knew his stuff. And I took a lot of advice from him, a lot of knowledge from him. And that got my juices flowing regarding coaching snooker. It fascinated me. And then I've spent the last sort of 7-8 years now studying neuroscience and really understanding what's happening inside here. And going back to that final, now I realize what the situation was, why it happened, why I was outside of my comfort zone, why my performance thermostat was being challenged. I'm feeling completely uncomfortable. And when that happens, you see different, you feel different, and everything changes. And so that's probably my route into coaching and why I'm doing what I'm doing now.
I think what you've actually just said there is pretty much a very, very good illustration of perhaps where the players are. The players here maybe have come up against it. They've realized, am I going to go any further? Where am I going? What am I doing? I'm not thinking correctly. Where's the mindset? Where am I going? So you've obviously come across that you've taken the steps you have, and you played obviously a good standard of snooker. Then by accident, you started thinking about your game, started thinking about what you could maybe how you could turn it around. You did that, and it's obviously brought you to where you are. So how did you get from that point to this point? Then I mean, you say you've been doing this professionally now. Is it 7 years?
In terms of coaching,
Yeah.
I've been studying neuroscience for 7 years, but my first client was 1997, Jimmy White, for
Right, okay.
years. It was a Jimmy White situation where he wanted some help. He'd obviously been hammered a few times by a certain Scot in the final of the World Championships on a number of occasions. I think he made the comment once that this guy's starting to annoy me now, and that was a fascinating couple of years with Jimmy, as you can imagine, for many different reasons. But that then led me into meeting a young guy called Peter Ebdon back in 1999. I can already hear the boos going on, and
yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible.
Peter Ebdon was a quick player back then. He was very natural. We started to work end of 1999, and his main goal, was to be the world snooker champion. And it was strange because at the time he said, and it would be wonderful if I could play Stephen Hendry in the final, because I think he'd lost a final previously to Stephen, and he wanted to sort of correct that situation. So we started to work a lot on the technical side, because Peter, for example, he's a player that when he strikes the cue ball, he's looking at the cue ball. He doesn't cue straight. He cues from what's called left to right. So he has a left to right mechanic through the cue ball. But when you understand that the cue ball actually leaves the tip after only a few millimeters during follow through, then straight cueing isn't actually as important as you would initially think it probably would be. It's not really about cueing straight. Look at people like Judd Trump, except as an example. It's about striking the cue ball where the player intends to strike it. And many players can do that in different ways. Everybody's natural. Everybody's different. Everybody does things in a different way. As a coach, you've got to be very careful not to interfere with those natural processes, the way they naturally play the game. Because when they go out into that arena under what's called pressure, which isn't, well, there's no such thing as pressure, but it's an emotional state created by the brain perceiving a situation in a certain way. And this is we'll talk about this. It's about getting into a situation where you start to feel comfortable in that environment, basically. So we looked at Peter's ability to strike the cue ball where intended. It wasn't optimum, so we made a few changes there. That, of course, then, if you're striking the cue ball slightly different, it changes the aiming of the shot slightly as well. So we had to coordinate those two things. But one of the main things we started to use was what's called visualization. And that's a very interesting word, visualize. And the reason I say that, Dave, is that the subconscious part of your brain, where your beliefs and your habits actually reside, that part of your brain doesn't know the difference between what's real and what isn't real. What's actually happening now in your current environment compared to your memory files or your memories. It doesn't know the difference, which is a fascinating thing, because you can start to wire your brain in certain ways to feel comfortable in these potentially pressure situations. So we did a lot of work, and, well, as you can see, 2 years later, Peter played in the World Championships. I think he was bottom half. Stephen was top half. They both won last 16. They both won quarterfinals. And he said to me, "Can you see what's happening here?" He was almost anticipating it happening. I think Stephen played Ronnie O'Sullivan, didn't he, in the semi-finals?
I think so.
And there was a little bit of friction in the press where Ronnie had said something about Stephen and go back to Scotland or something. And I think that got Stephen's back. That's one of probably the biggest mistakes you can do with Stephen. If you get him wound up, he's going to be a force to be reckoned with. So he actually beat Ronnie in the semis. Peter got through. I don't know how he beat Matthew Stevens. Matthew, in my opinion, should have won that match.
Oh, well, then, yes.
It was an amazing match. I think it was like ridiculous amounts of plus 50 breaks. I think it's a record. Anyway, Peter managed to win. And then, of course, 17-17, Stephen Hendry. Everybody's obviously expecting Stephen to win now because it's the final frame. This is Stephen's living room, basically. His slippers are under the table, his cigar's on the side. He's having a, he feels that comfortable in the Crucible Theatre that you'd expect Stephen to go on and win that frame. But Peter had done a lot of work to literally rewire the brain with these implanted memory files of doing this situation. So his brain actually dealt with it in a very calm and relaxed way. And he managed to make a brilliant 59 break, and he won the final. So that was my second sort of client in snooker. And then it sort of developed from there. Then so the next biggest client was Stephen Hendry, 2007 for 5 years. Met Sean Murphy in 2013. And then sort of other players started to come on board. And there's one or two interesting stories about Sean that we can potentially talk about, and how he went from not being able to make maximum 147 breaks on TV to then making 3 within a calendar year. And again, that was a little bit of rewiring in the brain. Fascinating stuff.
But Peter obviously, just touching on Peter again, Peter obviously absorbed all this stuff you were telling him, didn't he? Do some players absorb it quickly, or do some players have a little bit of trouble getting to grips with what you're trying to do? Was Peter okay, and Sean?
I think one of the keys to coaching, Dave, is understanding the individual that's in front of you. Everybody's different, and everybody receives information in different ways. There's different learning styles. There's auditory, there's visual, there's kinesthetic, there's different ways. So you've got to find out who's in front of you and provide the information in very understandable terms in a methodology that they can take on board and use. And I've always based my coaching on facts. I don't want to give you my opinion. I want to give you some facts. I want to base what you're doing on facts and bring some solutions to those problems. So when you're coaching an individual person, you've got to know who they are. You've got to know what they're about, how they learn, and provide the information in a way that they are 100%, sure of what you're talking about. They understand everything. And I always ask the players, if you don't understand something, stop me. Let's make sure you're really following what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. So we got Peter, you got Stephen. What areas, did Stephen come back to you and say, oh, hey, I tell you what, this has changed, this has helped me in so many different ways? What sorts of significant areas did you help Stephen in particular?
Okay, that's an interesting one. And why would Stephen Hendry come to me, for example? It's a good question. 7 times world champion at that point. But I think he'd made 1 or 2 technical changes that were tripping him up. And basically what I do, Dave, I went up to Scotland on our first session up to Stirling at the Spencer's Club. And the first thing I do on the table is to establish, when a player strikes the cue ball, what's exactly going on? What happens? What can they actually strike the ball where intended? So we did a little test with Stephen, because a player of that stature, he doesn't want bull. He doesn't want me giving opinions to him. Who am I? I have to prove some things on table. He has to see the results of those tests himself. So we did it, and he was now aware that he was applying a lot of unintentional right-hand side spin to the cue ball, in my opinion, because of some changes that he tried to implement. Now, that's optimum, because if you're applying unintentional side spin, then the cue ball is not arriving where you think it's going to arrive. Mm-hmm. You're going to get tripped up. Mm-hmm. So that was the first protocol with him. And I think because he'd spent a few years with a cue, and this is another important aspect, his cue got broken in 2003. Mm-hmm. Back from Thailand. Now, every cue has a characteristic, what we call a deflection degree attached to it. In other words, when you strike a cue ball slightly off center, that cue will deflect the cue ball to a specific degree. So you can imagine, let's say, a long shot over distance, an angle shot that you're cutting into a corner pocket, and you're playing that with a little bit of side spin, then you've become accustomed by habit to know where to aim that shot. But now if you've got a cue that affects that cue ball differently, you're going to miss the shot. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he quite understood that, because he had a pretty low quality cue. It was about 40.
Yeah, it was a
very good.
20 quid or something.
I think it was, yeah, exactly. But actually, it was low in deflection. It didn't push the ball off a lot. The density of the wood wasn't very high. It was quite weak wood. And then he's moved to a better quality cue with a more density, with a higher end mass of the cue. And now that same shot that he would have normally potted with a bit of side spin is now missing thick because the white's pushing too far, especially on brand new cloths, because the newer the conditions, the more the cue ball pushes offline with side spin. And so I think he went through a few years struggling with that, in combination with trying to fix something that probably wasn't fixed, which is another big mistake snooker players make. And I suppose in any sport, you know, when you try and start to fix, so imagine opening a bonnet of a car and there's something wrong with the spark plug, but you're focusing on the piston. Well, you can spend all day long and you're not going to fix it.
That's not going to happen.
You've got to find out if there's something wrong, what is it, and what's the best methodology to fix that for the individual player. And everybody's different. And I think this is the key to coaching. You've got to be able to work individually on different aspects with different kinds of players. And it's an important point. And then, of course, I brought in what's called the neural rewiring process. This is some new words for you. This is based on neuroscience, and it's literally a methodology to rewire your subconscious, to increase your comfort zones, to get the brain to recognize certain things so the alarm bells don't fire. The fight, freeze, or flight doesn't fire off in certain situations, because if the brain releases the chemicals to run or fight or freeze because it's recognizing something as potentially dangerous, and like we've said, it doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality, and that word fear, false evidence appearing real, whether it's real or not, you can literally be frightened to death. And I'll give you an example of that. You might have gone to watch a horror movie at a cinema once, and if it was a real horror movie, you consciously know it's just a white plastic screen on the wall, and there's a little bit of light flashed up onto that screen. But after 10-15 minutes, you can literally be looking through your fingers, biting your nails, frightened to death, because your subconscious brain is turning that into real, and you experience it like it's real. Just like having a nightmare in your bedroom, nice and safe, 3 o'clock in the morning, you've had a nightmare, you've woken up literally sweating, frightened to death, because your subconscious has basically turned that nightmare into a real thing for you. You've now perceived it to be real. And this is what happens with snooker players. All memory files can come up, all memories can pop up from previous experiences, and you literally go through the same emotional feelings again.
So the players, what you're saying is that the players have to turn this around. They have to adapt this new way of thinking. They run a 7-step process on a daily basis for a half an hour to 40 minutes of breathing, concentration, audios, videos, visualization. We use some other little tools as well to literally rewire, because basically, Dave, every time you swing your arm like that, your brain creates a neural connection. Whenever you think a thought, your brain creates a neural connection. And with repetition of action and thinking, the brain starts to wire and join and make more and more what we call neural connections. And basically, it forms the two majors for performance, which are beliefs and habits. And beliefs and habits are literally a cluster of neural connections in your brain caused by repetition. So what I would say to any snooker player, you've got to make sure that your repetition is very, very effective and precise, because every time you repeat something, you're creating a habit of doing that in the future. Well, it seems to affect everything that you do in life. I mean, what you just said is perhaps maybe one of two great things. You know, that this is a whole new way of thinking, you know. Either that or just getting rid of your wife, you know, that can help too, you know, in some ways, you know. But I mean,
Are you sure?
We're not going to delve on that one too much, Chris, you know, but sometimes we get distractions in the world of snooker, and it's not all about, you can get involved with the wrong people. Let's just touch on people, by the way, Chris, while we're on that. We've talked about the subconscious a little bit there and what you're doing. But what are the other problems that players are thinking about? Have you covered everything here, or should they sort of be a little bit aware about the other things they're thinking about, like their logistics, their traveling, their and other people, things like that, and their personal lives? This is something that you're saying, is that going to help with everything?
Well, there's a saying, birds of a feather flock together. You become like the people you spend most time with. So don't spend time with negative people. You don't. I mean, unfortunately, the majority of people are just naturally negative.
Chris, that's fantastic. Chris, I'm just going to get rid of the wife. Hang on a second. Guys, I'm only joking. There's no, absolutely, I don't have a wife anyway. There's not a woman out there that'll put up with me, for that matter. Okay, I need all these things that you're telling us about here, Chris. I need them all just to walk out the door and take the rifle up to Bisley or go for a run. I need all the things that you're talking about.
I think we all need some of it, Dave. We
do. So let's get back to the players. Okay, let's get back to the players here now, because this is what this is all about.
Okay, so one of the routines that I came up with for Stephen was what's called the 147 challenge, and I mentioned it to you regarding Sean. It's interesting because Stephen was struggling, but here's the deal: Stephen had children, his family changed, the amount of practice literally halved when I got involved. So from 2007, 2008, from probably practicing around 7 hours, literally daily, 6 days a week, he's probably halved it. Now, we know in neuroscience, your brain thrives on massive, effective repetition. Mm-hmm. There's something in the brain called atrophy. And when you stop practicing to a certain level, the neurons in your brain start to break up. And the habits start to become a little bit weaker. So it is about quality practice, but it is also about quantity as well. You've got to do enough of it to keep these habits optimum. And so Stephen, interestingly, he made a 147 at the Crucible. That was an experience, by the way. To be live in that Crucible theatre, watching him make a 147 was phenomenal. That was hair back of your neck. Pardon?
Did he look up at you?
that doesn't interest me, all that stuff. He then made a 147 in the Welsh in 2011, and then the year after, when he told me a few months before the Crucible Theatre that he was going to retire, and in my opinion, I said, "Listen, it's too early, mate. You're playing far too well to be retiring from snooker. This is still your career." But because, of course, it's a winning machine, and he wasn't winning, he was getting frustrated. Mm-hmm. He made that decision to quit, and he said, "I'm not playing well enough." Well, he played the first round against Stuart Bingham, and he made a brilliant maximum break in the second session, which was again was sensational. So he was playing brilliant, but he wasn't playing consistently to the higher, to a high enough level. Right. But when people ask me about Stephen Hendry and who's the greatest player, for example, look at Stephen's final in 1994 against Ken Doherty, when he beat Ken 10-5 and made 7 century breaks. Mm-hmm. In that is sensational. And I would just say Stephen's 2 majors, the reason why I believe he was so brilliant was his temperament. He had the brilliant temperament.
Yeah.
And he almost seemed to get better the more tense it became. And his concentration levels. I've never known anybody that could concentrate as well as he could.
Just touching on temperament, Chris. Okay. Temperament is a big problem. Massive problem.
I'm sure, yeah.
How do you deal with this? How do you deal with the players? I mean, say this is a specific, particular problem with a player, temperament. How would you get that? Try to resolve that problem?
Well, I think attitude is a good word. And we say attitude equals altitude, and temperament Basically, he's being controlled subconsciously. It's a player responding to certain situations without them even trying to do it. It happens. And based on the fact that now the neuroscientists are now saying that around about 97% of all of our thoughts and therefore our emotions are controlled subconsciously on autopilot. Our job is to wire some good stuff into the subconscious so that it deals with things in a better way. And temperament is basically emotion. It's how a person's feeling about something. Are they going to get angry about something? Are they going to get frustrated? Are they going to bang the table? Or are they going to choose to stay calm? Because with the information now that we know, if you start to get angry and frustrated at snooker, you go into what's called a beta wave brainwave, and the habits are being turned off. You now have to start to think about what you're doing. As soon as you consciously start to think about doing what you're doing, and for example, you're a brilliant shooter with a rifle, but don't get embarrassed.
No, it's okay. Just keep praising me.
The less you think about actually what you're doing, and the more instinctive and the more habitual it is, a little bit like driving a car. I mean, how can you literally go from not being able to drive a car when you first learn to 6 months later driving with your knee on the wheel, sending an SMS to your girlfriend? I'm not remembering the journey that you've just driven because it was all on autopilot. And that basically right there, Dave, is a piece of driving software that you've created. You've created walking software. And these professional players are creating snooker software, and they have to learn to rely on that software to do the work. Yes, they have to consciously get involved. They've got to make the shot choices. They've got to concentrate on one or two things that help them to perform at their best. But the vast majority of what they're doing has to be habitual.
The temperament thing, for me, I mean, obviously running the events, the temper thing overwhelms me, Chris. I see it. I see it in the kids' faces.
Yeah.
They lose their matches. They don't find a rhythm. They can't perform.
Yeah.
Boom, out the door, gone. You know
one of the big things with that, one of the big things with what you just said there is embarrassment.
Yeah.
And I think because one of our major fears as human beings is what people think about us. We're too concerned with what other people think. When you're playing snooker, there's nowhere to hide. And by the way, these professional snooker players that go out live on TV, it's phenomenal what they're doing. It's not easy.
They're dealing with that.
It's not an easy thing to do that. And to perform at that level of, some of the guys that perform at incredibly high levels, it's phenomenal what they're doing. Sometimes we take it for granted, but it's tremendous what they're doing out there. In my opinion, snooker is the highest skill sport in the world. As you know, I work with professional golf players, but I'd still say snooker is a higher skill set.
It is. No, it is. And when I say that to people, other sports people, they don't believe me. They don't. I mean, snooker is a very, as you say, mind-driven, focused sport, and you need to keep up with all of these things, all of these pressures, all of these things are going through your head.
Sure.
I mean, I suppose when footballers go on the pitch for 90 minutes, they're expected to perform in just 90 minutes. There's snooker players have got to do a lot more thinking, a lot more prep.
The difference with football, it's very reactive until there's a penalty, or until there's a free kick, or until there's a corner. Now there's a bit more conscious decision going on. And you can literally see some players that take penalties who, they don't even hit the target. They're that nervous. It just shows you how the mind affects the physical body.
I mean, I say to the players, I've got some very, very good lads, very, very talented lads, old and young, that are coming down playing in the pro-ams every month. And, they just need to, I think you've just illustrated their problems. And they need to, I very often encourage them, just going back to what we're talking about there, about leaving, feeling embarrassed perhaps, maybe I've lost my match, I'm playing crap, I'm out of here, I want to get out of this building. That to me, that's negative. I think I encourage them to stay. I encourage them to stay and watch and just sit. I want you to, I've said to all of them, sit down, shut up, I'll buy you a drink. and just watch your opponent, and sit down and think about where you're going wrong and where your weaknesses are. Just take a deep breath, and push yourself a little bit.
Let me give you an example. I mean, I played a tournament when I was, how old would I be? I think I was 17 or 18. It was the United Kingdom Schweppes Championships under 21s. And funnily enough, in the semi-finals, I played Stephen Hendry. And I managed to win. I beat Stephen 3-1. And he was so angry after that match. He just wanted to go home. And the organizer said to him, Stephen, if you want your prize money, you've got to stay and watch the final.
Yeah.
And he said, keep your effing prize money. I'm off, pal. Right. Now you're talking about temperament, and I think it's a pro. He's a winner. It's a process. You've got to learn these things. You've got to experience these things. But the key is to learn from them. And like I always said to the players, success, it resides on the far side of failure. Mm-hmm. And failure is the fertilizer of success. So don't be afraid to lose. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's how you learn. That's the learning process.
And it's not just the temperament issues lead to other things. They lead to things like not only poor performance on the table, but you can. It's very easy to disrespect your opponent on the table. If your opponent, I mean, snooker is one of those games where a little bit of luck can go a long way. Like a kick or a fluke, can at a high standard could cost you the frame.
Yes,
and that affects players enormously too. That luck, I mean, it's quite a high percentage actually. Probably, Chris, I don't know whether you agree, but luck is in snooker is a high percentage, and the players have to deal with that too.
Would you agree with this? That doesn't it seem to be that the player that's looking confident, feeling great, playing great snooker, why does he get the little flicks and the flukes? Why does it go that way? And why is the guy who looks negative and is shaking his head and banging his cue, why does he get the poor flicks and he ends up in difficult positions and he's going in off and everything? He gets the kicks and the bounce. All these things seem to happen to the guy that's in a negative state. Not all the time, but it tends to go that way. And so, we're not going to go into the quantum physics perspective here about energy and how things are affected, but there's stuff going on that we're not even aware of. In my opinion, from my experience, it seems to be that way. But we do talk to the players about two things. What are the things that you can control? What are the things that you can't control? And you've got to be very good at dispelling all those things that you can't control: kicks, bounces, referees, crowds, table conditions, clubs, lights, supporters. All these things are out of your bubble. You can't do anything about them. And if you allow them to come inside that bubble and affect your emotional state, you're in trouble. You've got to get good at this stuff. And it's practice. And then on the other side, what are the things that you can control that are going to help you today to perform at your best? That's what you're going to get out there and focus on.
Very, very interesting. And I think, we'll try and get off the issue of temperament in a minute, but it seems to be a big problem. You've touched on all those areas too, as well. And we see, look, all the players will experience a temper. Top players, all the top players will.
Human nature.
Like you said, I've had some really good professional players come up to me and talk about the yellow and the black. I'm thinking, what the hell are you on about? What are you talking? You got a problem with the yellow? The yellow keeps letting you down. You missed the yellow 5 times for a 147. You missed the yellow and cost you a frame. I mean, what's the matter with you?
Maybe in the shootout, the yellow's a problem.
I knew this was going to happen. I knew he was going to flip the ball to win the match. I mean,
how many times do you hear that?
I listen, Chris. I don't want to listen to that crap. I mean, it's like, I don't look. I'm not a believer in God. I don't think I don't believe in gods. You know what I mean? I believe in a wee bit of luck. And if you get down on the shot, and there's a bit of chalk on the ball, and boom, you get a big kick. You know, that's just bad luck. And all right, there's a wee bit of chalk. Somebody was in the wrong place at the wrong time and put a bit of chalk on the table, and that's it. Get on the ball. You know, that's it. So get over it. You know.
In my world, we call that the law of probabilities. Rather than talk about luck, because when you start blaming luck, which is external locus of control, you can't control it, you're better off trying to take some responsibility for it, because you'll deal with it better, what we call an inner locus of control. Mm-hmm. So, you know, luck, basically, whatever happens on that snooker table, it's been caused. Mm-hmm. Something or somebody has caused it to happen. So the probability of it happening in the first place was there. Now, sometimes the most ridiculous things happen. I mean, how can so many crazy things happen on a 12 by 6 foot snooker table? It's mind blowing. And they do, and they keep happening, and they'll always keep happening. It's just, you just have to try to get rid of the frustration when all these things happen, and it's not an easy thing.
Chris, that's a big table with a lot of balls, for one thing. You know what I mean? You know, this is not just, you know, this is a lot of tiny little balls that are fairly heavy, and there's lots of different things that you have to do to control the cue ball and make the balls go where they want to go. And you know, it's all right. It is conditions have an effect, obviously, and stuff like that. But players, I think, very clearly what we've talked about in the last half hour alone, I think players need to be very conscious of all these things, and that you know, look, I'm not stopping the guys from going to church or anything here, Chris. You know what I mean? They don't have to be a non-believer like me. You know, Dave, the godless twit snooker player. You know, but they can, you know, boys, your gods are not going to help you on the snooker table. You're going to help yourselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Exactly. So, right, let's touch on a couple of other wee things now that you deal with when you work with a player. Okay. Yeah. There's great players out there. I'll just mention a couple of names. And for me, these are the type of players that know how to reconstruct themselves very well for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe you can explain why. But, you know, Higgins and Selby, you know, for example, perhaps have maybe got something that Ronnie doesn't have, as much as Ronnie has got probably a bit more flair and a bit more positivity when he gets in and scores. But like Selby, for example, I mean, he probably not the most exciting player in the world, and he will admit this himself. But this man here, he digs deep. He could be 3 or 4 or 5 frames behind, and he seems to find something that the other players don't have. Why does this type of player? What is he doing? What is he doing?
Well, for example, Mike Selby is very interesting, and obviously a brilliant snooker player. But the number of times I've seen him in trouble in a match, when he just seems to just relax and calm down, and he looks better when he's 3 or 4 frames down than he does when he's 3 or 4 frames in front. That's right. He finds a way to just calm down and relax, and he starts playing. And of course, when you're in front and you can see somebody coming back at you, and you know it's someone like Mark Selby who's never going to give up, you know, a bit like Peter Ebdon, you've literally got to scrape them off the table. Mm-hmm. They're going to fight to the death, and it doesn't matter what the score is. And if he needs 5 snookers, he's going to try and get them. But isn't that a brilliant thing to send out to your opponent? You're going to have to play so well today, right to the very death, because if you don't, I'm in here and I'm coming back at you. So Selby is of that ilk. He's a fighter. He's a battler. He's also a brilliant player as well. And I would say John Higgins is something similar. Higgins, what a phenomenal player he is. You know, I mean, over the years. Pardon?
Strangely enough, Chris, you know, both these players, perhaps maybe similar temperaments.
Yeah.
Would you say?
Well, I would say those 2 players.
Good temperaments, good demeanors, really good
brilliant
temperaments, and that, I mean, that tells me something.
Well, Stephen Hendry, great temperament. John Higgins, brilliant temperament. Mark Selby, brilliant temperament. Now, can you imagine what Ronnie would have achieved this last 20 odd years if he had been blessed with that kind of temperament? Ronnie's temperament can be brilliant, but as we know, it can be the other way as well. And for me, it's cost him lots and lots of success over 20 years. That temperamental, emotional thing that goes on. So he's a different animal than a Higgins, a Selby. He's probably as mercurial as someone like Alex Higgins. Probably as mercurial as not quite Jimmy White, but I would certainly put Alex Higgins and Ronnie O'Sullivan in a similar description in terms of temperament. Anything could happen at any moment. So John Higgins and Selby, fighters, battlers, never give up. And I think if you've got that attitude that you're going to give your best at all times, regardless of what's happening, you're going to get a lot of success where other players wouldn't have.
I'm just touching on Ronnie. While we're at it, Ronnie, okay, we're sort of saying that Ronnie maybe perhaps doesn't have some of the very, very crucial elements maybe that Higgins and Selby has, but Ronnie is perhaps maybe a very different type of player. And we've got all these different types of player. We've got very, very attacking players who rely on their scoring and their big long pats. Yeah. Players like O'Sullivan, players like Trump, players like Murphy, they come in there. And then you've got the Selbys and the Higgins who will perhaps maybe not take that long shot, and they'll wait for their opportunities and they'll dig in. And that's what makes them such a great match players that they are. So we've got all these different types of player.
Yes. No, absolutely. And I think when you talk about someone like Ronnie, it's not only a different kind of player, it's a different kind of person. I think that's the thing. He's a different animal. There's a different human being.
He seems very bored these days, Ronnie. I see a man who's getting a wee bit fed up. I don't know why it's because I think he's getting to an age. He's getting older. All players are getting older. He's still got a lot of quality, but I think there's part of me thinks he's a bit tired. Part of me thinks he's a bit bored. He'd like to see something different in the game. He'd like to see something completely different in the format and the formula. Do you get that impression?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's done everything. He's won everything, hasn't he? He's done it all. He's won 5 world titles, and I don't know how many other majors he's won. A lot of them. I think 5 Masters as well, and 4 or 5 UKs. Traveled around the world for many, many years. But you know what? I think this strange situation that we've been in for the last few months, for a lot of players like him, he might actually start to appreciate a little bit of what he had and what snooker actually is for him, what it means to him. Because in these kinds of situations, you tend to sort of step back and have a sort of a look at it from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. Hopefully for Ronnie, it's going to give him a new impetus, a new goal, if you like. But when you talk about age, and as I mentioned, I've been in golf and I spoke to Tom about this. Tom Watson should have won the Open Championships at 59 years of age.
Yes, he should have done, yeah.
It was only something strange that happened on the 18th that cost him a shot where he would have certainly been tied in a playoff. But at 59 years of age, playing against all the top players in the world, in one of the biggest tournaments there is, and that is a more physical sport than snooker is, then I think if you keep yourself relatively fit and you keep your mind strong, why can't you go into the 50s as a professional snooker player and compete? I think you can. And I think it's going to happen. And Ronnie could be one of the first players to actually do that if he really commits and wants to do it.
By the way, Chris, I don't know whether I think you probably picked up on this, but just having a look over the last 10 years, a lot of professional snooker players are not really finding their feet. They're not really finding themselves until they're in their 40s. I mean, a lot of tour professionals who haven't done as well as they would have expected are saying that they've matured and got better. But I mean, look at Mark Davis, who came through perhaps later on in his career, and many other players who are playing better in their 30s, late 30s, early 40s. Is this a new thing? Do you think this? I don't know how you describe it, but players who have been on the tour for maybe 10 years and all of a sudden they're finding something extra.
Yeah, for me, I think it's experience, and I think they've done it so many times. They start to get really comfortable in these situations. They get comfortable in the arenas. They get used to it, and of course, most players try to fine-tune things and try to improve things as well. But I also think that, as we said before, birds of a feather flock together. You become like the people that you surround yourself with. And if you, for example, try to compare somebody like Steve Davis in the 80s with somebody now, it's very difficult to do that, because the guys now are playing, in my opinion, there's just far more high-level snooker players now down the rankings. There's almost no easy games anymore now. Everybody can play. Everybody can compete. And by the way, with the format now, all these lower ranked players are getting the opportunity to compete against these top players in the match arenas. It's creating these files and this experience, and they're getting more and more comfortable with that situation, which is another reason why the level's becoming much higher, because everybody's more accustomed to things, you know. But in terms of players performing and improving into the 30s and 40s, there's absolutely no reason why. There's a conception about age. It's here. It's self-belief. It's self-image. Until you physically can't do something, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to compete.
I'm going to give you an example of a player here. You can give me your thoughts on it, okay? I just found it very, very strange. Now, I've been watching young Jack Lazowski for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether you've had any dealings with Jack, but I was quite fascinated as to how he just suddenly came to life, because I watched him a few years ago when he got on the tour, and then he went through a period of there for a few years where he just sort of like playing a different, very fast-paced game, very, very similar to Judd Trump's style of play, very fast, very attacking game of snooker, but he just wasn't going anywhere. And I could see a player with loads and loads of potential, and I was watching him all the time, and I'm thinking, why are you not getting over the line? Why? So what's happened to him then in the last 2 or 3 years that's just sort of, springboarded him up? Has he just found something? That, do you think it's the things we've been talking about?
Two major things for me. There's two main things. We talked about becoming like the people that you spend time with. Now, who's been Jack's main practice partner this last 2 or 3 years?
Judd? Was it? I don't know. Yeah.
Imagine practicing with Judd every day.
No good.
What's that going to do to you?
It's not really going to develop your game, I don't think, in a lot of ways. Perhaps.
Well, you're going to learn. Well, there's two things. You're going to learn a lot of things. You're going to be pulling a lot of balls out. That's for sure. But you're spending time around the number one player in the world, and you're getting comfortable in that environment.
Yep, comfort zone.
Right. And also now with experience over these last few seasons, you can literally see he's become much more comfortable in the match situation. He's always been a brilliant player. He's very natural. He's very quick. Thinks very quick. He's got a natural brain for snooker. He's just very talented.
He's very, very talented. He's amazing. Yeah.
But the fact of it is, Dave, if you work it back, there's what's called a continuum. We start at the end of the continuum. Players are looking to get results. What influences results most is performance levels. Then you work it back one more. What influences performance more than everything else? And that's emotion, how you feel. Now, obviously, his emotional states and how he felt over these last few seasons has been better than previously, because he's managed to be able to follow through and perform to a very high level in match situations. When you work it back one more from emotions, what causes our emotions is how we think. But the crazy thing is, 97% of our thoughts are automatic. They're happening without us even trying. So you've got to wire in there some great stuff. So the brain starts using good software and not poor software.
Is that why I get headaches all the time, Chris?
I think it's that dodgy wine you're drinking, Dave.
That's not wine, that's Coke.
Oh.
What are you on me for? I'm the host of this show. Don't start on me or we'll, Anyway, Jordan Brown, I hope you're watching this stuff, because this comfort zone thing is something, you know what I mean? And Jack Lazowski, great player, fantastic. I'm glad he's sort of come. Jack, I want you to come on here and talk about that. Jack Lazowski, anybody know him? I haven't got his phone number. somebody give me a call. Get Jack to give me a call. I want to get him on here. And we're going to talk about this suddenly becoming what he is, a great player, and it's taken a while, but he's got there, you know. But yes, you know, Chris, the thing is, just touching on that there again, a lot of we mentioned the tour players too, and you know, I like to touch on the number of players who are on the tour is 128 professionals.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of those lads down the bottom end who have just come in. You know, they're trying really hard. They're very frustrated, but they need to absorb a lot of the stuff that you're talking about here. They need to get the grips with things like comfort zones.
Yeah.
And perhaps maybe, you know, even touching on the fact that even though they're losing their first round matches, their qualifying matches, in which case they're not making any money.
Yeah.
You know, it shouldn't stop them from moving around, playing other players, you know, from going to different venues, different clubs, maybe not cooping yourself up, you know, with one player. You know, make arrangements, go into the players' lounge, start talking to some of the other players and say, look, listen, can I come over to Cambridge for a couple of days? Can I come over to Southampton, Manchester?
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter. You know, if you've got a break for a few weeks before your next tournament, go and play other players.
Absolutely.
Go and play the other players that are on the tour. And a lot of the players are not doing this, Chris. They're not doing it. Is that something that you encourage?
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, you've talked about 128 players, and I think the first thing you've got to do, if you're pursuing a professional career in snooker, you've got to have a financial plan ready.
Right.
You've got to be able to say, right, I can afford to play this sport for the next 2 years if I qualify, even if I don't win a match. Because you know what? The chances are, because of the structure at the moment, in your first rounds, it's probable that you're going to be playing top 16 players.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not easy. I'm not saying they can't win, but the odds are vastly, you know, they're strong against them to win. So they could have a series of tournaments, and this is happening to a lot of players, where they're playing top class players. They can't manage to get a win. I mean, it's brilliant experience, but that doesn't put money in the bank, does it?
It doesn't. You get a bit of bad luck.
You know, it can go that way. But I definitely agree with you. You've got to practice with very good players.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very important. And also, I think an important aspect are the conditions of the tables that you're practicing on, because a brand new cloth scenario is a different ball game than a cloth that's worn in the club. It's a different game completely.
Absolutely. And I think touching on that for a wee second. I spoke with a few players this week who play in my pro-ams who practice on professional tables with other professional players, although they're amateurs, and they come to my pro-ams and they really struggle on the club tables. And that's just one of those things, lads. But the thing is, you've got to just play on in as many competitions as you can. The thing is, if you're not playing on a challenge tour and you're not playing on a pro tour and you want to develop your game for Q School, you're going to have to play other matches. And unfortunately, they're going to have to be played in clubs.
You know, going back to when I was younger, and it's obviously a long time ago, there were pro-ams all over the place. You know, the snooker scene back then, it was buzzing.
It was.
You could literally play from week to week in tournaments.
Right. Yeah.
So but that's obviously that scene's now gone. I mean, so for a lower ranked professional player that's not doing too well, it's not easy. So I think what you're saying is arrange some practice matches. Mm-hmm. Absolutely critical. Yeah. Keep that match practice going.
Double hit question that's actually just come in actually. Similar question. Just get it out of the way in case I forget. Is what makes a good coach, Chris? And what advice would you give a young coach or a new coach?
I think a good coach has to be personable. He has to be understanding. He has to be patient. He has to understand individuals. He has to understand a little bit about learning styles. Mm-hmm. Of course, he has to have a lot of knowledge of the game itself. You know, you've got to understand the game. You can't talk to somebody about something that you don't really understand. So the basics of snooker for me, there's two basics, and coaches need this information. And it's not all about everybody gripping the cue the same way, bridging the same way, having the same length bridge distance, putting the cue on their face in the same position as Ronnie, who's very left eye sighted, compared to Stephen Hendry, who's slightly right eye sighted. Everybody is individual. And so the key for a coach is to individualize and personalize the approach to that individual so that it can achieve very quickly first two keys. Number one is the ability to strike the cue ball where intended by habit. And the second one is to learn to aim the cue ball at the moment of impact correctly by habit. And everybody is potentially going to do that in slightly different ways, slightly different stance, slightly different grip, slightly different length backswings. There's so many different aspects. So a coach, if they can find what works best for that individual player and help them to, with repetition, habitualize those things, that's a good coach.
Very interesting. And just extending from coaching, because this is one of the things, many things I wanted to talk to you about, actually, Chris, and this players when they're practicing and things like routines. How important are routines?
Well, hugely important. And we have about 28 what we call template shot routines, which cover long potting, break building, safety play, playing from the cushion. And I've also, you've probably heard about the balls, which we'll probably give you some more information about in a minute.
We'll get on to the balls.
But I'm going to give you some information, for example, about Sean Murphy. I'm not sure if Sean's watching, by the way, he probably is. But one of his goals in 2013 was to make a 147 break live on TV.
That's right. You said that.
And the way he described it was, whenever I get anywhere near, like, for example, to that final yellow you were talking about, Dave, I just don't seem to be able to get it because I'm so nervous, I'm shaking, I'm sweating, and therefore I can't really concentrate, and I feel uncomfortable. I missed a shot, and it happened on a number of occasions. So, as a coach, how am I now going to be able to get some memory files into his subconscious brain of already having achieved the 147 break so many times through repetition that it creates the memory files in the bank, in the brain, and so the brain starts to deal with it as something recognizable. And what we did was we set up a routine on the table with 3 reds and the colors, and I said, right, Sean, 3 reds, 3 blacks, clear the table. And Sean looked at me and said, "Is something wrong with you?" Well, probably is, yeah. I said, but he said, "That's 51. I said, "I'm talking about 147. If people can understand this, if they don't get anything from me tonight apart from this is nothing." Right?
Yep.
Get your notebooks out, guys. Get your pens ready. A short pencil is better than a short memory. Write it down. Okay? I called out, just before he hit the first of the last 3 reds, 96. Right? Now, his subconscious, just like watching the horror movie, just like experiencing a nightmare, his subconscious will take 96 as fact, and it will react as the way it would do in a match because it doesn't know the difference. And he pops the red, 97. And he pops the black, and I'm clapping now. Replace the black, 104. And he pops the red and bursts out laughing. He said to me, "I'm shaking like a leaf."
Yes, you put pressure.
In the practice room. Right? Because the subconscious thinks it's real. Now, through repetition of doing these routines, visualizing them, recording them on video, watching it on video, the brain will watch that on video and it will not know the difference between actually doing it. And every time you view it and do it, you're creating memory files, Dave, in your brain.
Yep.
Because there's 2 little devils just inside your ear. We're not going to go too technical now, but they're called amygdala. And these 2 little muscles here are your basically mechanism to keep you alive. They're looking for danger all the time. And if they start to see something that they don't recognize, cortisol, epinephrine, noradrenaline fires into your system and you start to feel terrified. And now you can't perform. You're gone. Yes, there is a way to reverse that, but that's for another time. So through repetition over months, Sean did these routines, and in January 2014, live on TV. You can see it on YouTube. 147 break, live on TV. And he said afterwards,
Yeah.
a little bit nervous, but not like I would normally have been. And a few weeks later, Dave, he made a second 147 break live on TV.
Amazing.
And a few months later, he missed 3 attempts to make a 147 in Germany. And then in the final, made another 147 break. And he's the only player in history to make 3 maximums in a calendar year. So he's gone from not being able to do something. If you want clear evidence of how to prime your brain into feeling comfortable in a potentially dangerous situation, there's an example. And I will also say, when somebody wants to break the highest break, to make the highest break, wow, Chris, my highest break is 89. I can never get anywhere. I can't get past it. Guess what routine we're going to start nailing on a consistent basis? 3 or 4 reds in the colours, and we're going to start on 81, 82, 87, 88. You can see they're starting to get a bit uncomfortable. 94, 95. Now they're getting afraid of the century. And on almost every occasion, within months, high breaks are broken because they start to develop a belief system that I can do this. Huge.
It's part of everything. That's in terms of achieving your goals is believing in yourself. And you know, if you believe in yourself, you know that you can achieve those things, even though you have the ability and you lack certain things like maybe motivation, confidence, and belief to that extent. And it's very, very difficult. But I hope you're watching this, guys. And all right, I've got a feeling some of you are going to have to play this back. I know I am, because I'm going to have to play this back and listen to it again because...
well, you talked there about motivation, Dave. What does that word mean?
Absolutely.
What does the word motivation actually mean? Break it down into 2 words: motive, reason for taking action. And if these players have got a big enough reason, an exciting goal that, my goodness, if I could achieve that, this is now going to really start to drive you. And that means you're going to put the work in, you're going to put the practice in that's required. Motivation is a big thing, but you've got to find the reason why you're doing it in the first place. And that reason has to literally drive you through the wall. And that's passion.
Chris, I'm trying to motivate myself to run 3 miles every day, and I have to be honest, I'm having a real big problem.
Okay, Dave, what's the reason why you want to run 3 miles every day?
So I can lose a bit of weight.
Why do you want to lose a bit of weight?
Because I'm too fat around the belly.
Okay, but what are the benefits to losing weight?
I just feel better about myself, and I might turn on more women.
Oh, so it's...
no, listen, there's only one woman in my life, and she's watching this.
We can look at the menu, but we don't have to order.
Listen, Chris, I used to be so fit. People used to take photographs of me walking into the snooker clubs, you know? Used to take pictures of me walking into the gymnasium.
Dave, if I said I'll give you £1,000 for every 3 mile run you run, what happens now?
I'm going to start right now, Chris. I'll send over the bank details. I'm on it.
Brilliant.
I just want to touch on something here. I'm trying to get all this stuffy stuff. Guys, you're going to have to play this back, you know? Anyway, this business of getting things right, I'm going to go back to something that we may or may not have talked about actually in a little conversation we had last week. Players watching themselves.
Yes.
Right? Now, I've said this to some of the kids down at some of the local clubs, you know, if you think there's something wrong with the way you're cueing, or, you know, take a look at yourself. And it's not difficult to put your mobile phone in the corner of the room, or buy a wee cheap tripod, or just get somebody to hold it up. And all they got to do is just hold it for about 15 minutes if you're hitting a break. And then you'll get to see certain little things that you'll recognize that you otherwise wouldn't, you know, when you're actually focusing on what you're doing, the job on the table. So
Yeah.
what would you say, Chris, are the important things about perhaps video filming yourself a bit and watching yourself?
In my opinion, Dave, I think one brilliant thing about rewatching a game is your shot selection, because sometimes you can be playing shots and you look back at it and think, I mean, Sean Murphy's mentioned this a few times. Why am I playing that shot there?
Mm.
So you can learn so much from things like that. But I would say regarding technique, for me, watching yourself play is more aesthetic. It's not really, you're not really seeing what you're actually doing. You know, you can look at some players like, Joe Swale, for example, years ago, who had a very unorthodox type of technique. And you'd look at him and say, well, you don't want to really emulate that sort of stuff. But the fact of it is, could he strike where intended? That's the question you've got to ask. So you've got to find out, using some interesting tools.
We're going to talk about them in a minute.
How are you striking the cue ball? Where actually are you striking the cue ball? You need to know. And so you need to have something that's going to give you the feedback so that you are 100% sure of exactly what you're doing. So watching yourself back on video doesn't necessarily give you the feedback in terms of technique and mechanics and your vision and how all that works. But I would say it's a very good thing to look at your temperament. You can see how you're reacting to certain things. You can see your shot selection. You can see, your positional play and your potting, and you can maybe spot some weaknesses in your game that you can work on.
And that's exactly. Players need to understand those weaknesses, and the only way they're very, very clearly going to recognize them is to see them, because they're not going to see them.
No, exactly.
That's why players need coaches. Players need coaches because somebody else is looking in. Exactly. And that's why you're there, not only on the table, but also to get in their heads, which is also true. Right now, we're going to have to touch on these balls here, mate, because, as usual, these things are running as long as a big movie. Some of my interviews are running longer than The Godfather Part 1.
Great.
So let's touch on the balls. Where did the ball thing start?
It came because of the understanding of neuroscience and beliefs and habits. Okay, so when you strike a normal cue ball, you only get a certain amount of feedback, right? So what I had to do was come up with a solution to helping players get the feedback of exactly what they're doing in the two main areas of snooker. Where are they striking and where are they aiming? Because if you can get those two things sorted out, and everybody can, regardless of their technique, mechanics and visions and whatever else, everybody has the ability to do this. Because with repetition, you can reprime your what we call visual cortex. You don't see with your eyes, by the way. You see with your brain, and your brain starts to develop habitual vision. So some players are actually aiming to miss, Dave, and they miss, but they'll never blame the aiming because they're not consciously aware of it. Right, so this one here, this is the cue ball. It's about 17 grams. Right, so the normal ball is 143 grams. And basically, all you're going to do with this ball, for example, is put it on the yellow spot and pot it into one of the far black corner pocket.
Right, so that's the object ball. Okay.
This is the cue ball.
That's the cue ball. Okay. Right. Okay.
If you apply any trace of side spin, it will not go in the pocket.
Okay.
To get it in the pocket, you've got to strike the cue ball smack in the middle. Now, I'm not saying that we're teaching people to play all shots with the middle without side spin. That's not what this is about. This is teaching a player that when you want to hit the middle, can you hit the middle? Which then means on the angle shots, when they're playing with little bits of side spin, they know then where a little bit of right hand side is, and they also know where a little bit of left hand side is, because they've trained two things: their mechanics to coordinate with their vision. So in other words, they're addressing the cue ball correctly for where they need to for their individual technique mechanics. Judd Trump addresses the cue ball way to the right.
He does, yeah.
But he doesn't hit there.
No, he adjusts through.
Moves across slightly and goes from right to left, and then hits the majority of time where he intends to. Every player is different. So with all these different technique mechanics, every player can learn to strike the cue ball with this ball. And then the other ball that we have is the red. And this one we use for different kinds of routines, but one of them is put it on the blue spot with a normal cue ball on the baulk line and try and pop that ball now into a corner pocket. The great thing with this is if the standard ball arrives at the ball slightly off center, this will magnify your aiming problem and it will go more offline than a standard red.
Way off than a normal abject ball. Yeah.
A lot more. So if you can get this ball in the pocket, and someone like Sean Murphy now will probably knock that in 10 out of 12, 10, get it in 10 times 12 attempts. He'll probably pop that into the pocket now, probably 10 times out of 12 attempts. And what this is all about, Dave, and this is the key, this is the reason, this is the key now, you're practicing in a very tight tolerance level. If you can get this ball to go straight and aim this one straight, then now you've got a little bit of play, a little bit of tolerance with the standard balls. So you're habitualizing effective striking and aiming with a very tight tolerance, so that now you get into a match and you make a small mistake, you get away with it.
Interesting.
And that's and by the way, with these balls, Dave, you can see there on the website, there's a whole bunch of videos that come with these balls that give all the lessons, video lessons of exactly how to use them.
Was there anything interesting or significant that Sean, when you first, I mean, Sean uses the balls. Did he see anything that he was doing differently than normal?
Yeah, Sean, for example, when we first started, was applying unintentional left-hand side spin.
Really? Okay. Fascinating.
A lot of people will say, well, Sean's technique's too good for that.
Yeah.
But listen, it doesn't take a lot to start developing small bad habits. They creep in. Now, the goal with a player is to identify if there's a problem, and he had unintentional left-hand side. Now, there's different ways to approach that. We can go a visual route. We can also go a mechanical route. And we went the mechanical route. And what you're going to see today is a player with probably as short a bridge distance from the cue ball as there is in the game.
Okay.
But for him, there's a specific reason for that, because it allows him to strike the cue ball exactly where intended.
Right. Okay.
What he's doing now, his first hour of the day is the balls and one of those spotted white balls to create brilliant habits.
So just tightening up that bridge hand was just for that was that was for him. That's what adjusted that slightly. That took away that unintentional side.
Right. So the major thing that causes side spin technically is what we call an arc or an S through the ball. The part of the mechanic that affects that the most is the distance between the grip and the bridge V. What is that distance?
Right. Okay.
And if you extend that difference slightly, it changes the arc.
Yep.
And therefore you get a different result. So you can play around a little bit, and it's not such a big fix. This is something that you can get used to in a matter of days.
Yeah.
And it gets to a point where the old way that you used to do it now feels uncomfortable. There's different things you can do mechanically, which we had to do with Sean, which fixed that problem. And now he can strike the cue ball exactly where he wants to. And that's why, another reason why, his safety game's improved as well, because his cue ball's arriving where he's expecting now.
Guys, I can't wait to get my hands on these balls. I'll tell you why, because it's, I'm going to win. I'm going to win all the seniors. I'm going to win every single over 50s competition in the UK. I'm going to win them all because my game is going to improve so much. Thanks to
Dave,
and his ball.
Have you got the balls?
I haven't got them yet. They're on the way, though, aren't they?
Tomorrow. They're on the way tomorrow.
No, I'll tell you what. When I had Sean on last week, Chris and Sean started talking about the balls. I went, "What do you want about? What do you want about?" And he started talking about these balls, and then he started talking about you, and it's fascinating because Sean is one of those. He is one of those players. I know Sean as a technical player, and he's a thinker. He's very conscious, and I can only imagine that the things that you've said to him, he absorbs straight away because of the natural type of thinking man that he is. Because he is, not a lot of the players are thinkers, Chris, on the tour. A lot, not. I mean, I'm talking about top professional snooker players here. I'm not going to mention any name, but they're not all great thinkers. You know, they've got lots of natural ability, and we can see that on the table, and we can see it in their ranking. But in terms of thinking,
well, there's a terminology, Dave. There's a terminology: unconsciously competent. You know the 4 stages of learning. There's unconscious incompetent. That's somebody who doesn't know, and they don't know that they don't know. Right. So there's something wrong, and they're not aware of it.
Right.
You then expose some of the things that aren't optimum to an unconscious incompetent type person, and they then become unconsciously competent. Okay. Sorry, that's the final stage. They become consciously competent. Sorry. So now they start to become aware consciously that there's an issue. Okay. And through repetition, eventually they become very good at something by habit. But there's a lot of players out there who are brilliant, and they're not really aware of how they're doing what they're doing. But as soon as something goes wrong, they're not really in a position to be able to fix it the right way.
Right. I have to see it. I have to see it very clearly. Yeah.
That's where a good coach can come in.
Yeah.
You know, and in any sport, you know, who coaches Tiger Woods? You know, who coaches Brooks Koepka? Who coaches Rory McIlroy? No, they have coaches. Because like you correctly said, Dave, you need somebody to have another perspective, to see it from another angle.
I think very much you do. And I don't really have too much of a reflection on my game. I just enjoy playing these days. But the thing is, looking at young players coming into the clubs and looking at the very competitive ones, I think, Chris, that they're not thinking about a lot of the things that we've talked about today. They're really not. You know, they're not thinking about their mindsets. They're not thinking about the subconsciousness, and they're not.
The problem is they're not aware of it. They're not aware of that information. That's the problem.
And it's the difference. I really do believe it is the difference between actually making it, actually getting over those first big wins, and playing well and moving up the rankings. And this is for all lower ranked players on the tour. Guys, this is very, very important. Watch this again if you have to, and listen to other players and listen to coaches like Chris here. And I think apply yourselves with all these things in mind. And I think that, if I nip down to the club now and again, I see the juniors in the clubs, and I think this is probably a little bit too heavy for them at the moment, this sort of stuff, if they're just developing their match. Their shots. But, we emphasize on things like repetition. Repetition is the essence of this game. And
well, it's effective repetition, Dave. It's the right kind of repetition, because unfortunately, there's a lot of players repeating the wrong things and creating bad habits.
They are, yeah. I mean, I often see young players, and I just ask them to replay the shots, and they're bored. They're just bored. They can't be arsed. They just say, "Oh, yeah, all right, yeah, that's good." They just carry on. It's like, and I know this is why, this is why I just go, well, get away. I just,
do you actually say get away? Are they the words you choose?
No, it depends. It depends who's in the club at the time,
I'll never forget Billy Connolly when he said, go away. It doesn't quite have the same impact as.
Yeah, I do. I do. I swear a lot at the pro-am players when they come down, and I get very loud. I'm quite loud and noisy anyway. But I do swear a lot at them, because I think, I see a lot of potential in them. And
you get frustrated yourself, do you, with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I get frustrated because I can see a lot of ability in some of them, not all of them.
Yeah.
But there's maybe about 20% of them, 30% maybe, that can get on the tour
Yeah.
and they have it, but there's a lot of areas where they're going wrong. Temperament is a big one, but I think probably having watched this show here today and maybe thinking about applying those things, and I think that for me is a massive part of the game, and I think if
I
they
think, I think certainly, and when you talked about working with the beginners and intermediate players, obviously you've got to work on the things that they need to learn in their stage of growth.
absolutely.
But I think at the top level, top class golf players, top class snooker players, I think the mental side becomes more and more important the higher level it becomes, because they can all physically play all the shots. They can all do it. So now it comes down to confidence, self-belief, self-esteem, comfort zones, and that what we call the PCM, the performance thermostat, that needs to be set high in preparation.
Well, let's touch on this word. For me, it's a big word. Okay, I mean we've went through a whole bloody dictionary of words here this evening, and but for me, I always try to encourage players to focus, really focus as much as they can, because if they can do that and apply themselves, then they start scoring very heavy. Yeah, heavy scoring is a sign of really moving forward. And the way the players focus themselves, I watch them. I don't watch them all. I can't watch everybody, Chris. I'd love to be able to watch everybody and help, but I'm watching players and I'm seeing these little attributes. I'm seeing these little things that are going on in their behavior, on the table, and I'm thinking, you know what, you need to get rid of that. You need to push that aside and focus on it. Do you see this as well? Is this something?
I do see that a lot, and I think another way of describing the word focus, Dave, is concentration.
Yeah.
And concentration is a big thing. It means only thinking about and focusing on what you're doing this second. In other words, be where you are now. But the problem is, on average, the average minute for each human being is we lose focus around 6 times every minute. That is average. So the second 6 times a minute is average for losing. And men, guess what? We won't talk about what they think about a lot of the time, but it's not snooker. Right? We are the second process in the neural rewiring process is a 10-minute concentration exercise to get you very, very good. And you've got to practice concentration. People think they can just switch it on and off. You've got to practice concentrating. So we use a routine to do that, and we use a 10-minute routine because on average, the total clearance is going to be 10 minutes. So focus and concentration is, and you're right, it's critical, and that's where Hendry was so good. You've got to practice concentration and be very, very good at keep bringing your mind back to what you're doing now, because you are going to wander.
No, it's very important. Big part of everything that's going on.
It is.
But I think, we've covered a lot of stuff. I think there's something, watching a couple of your little bits and pieces. What did you mean by a pre-mortem? What's a pre-mortem? we know what a post-mortem is. What's a pre-mortem?
Well, can you explain what a post-mortem is?
I know what a post-mortem is on the body, but
okay.
How do we conduct a pre-mortem?
Okay, so I'm sat down with one of the players who's going into a match, and we'll do a little mini pre-mortem. What if this happens? How are you going to deal with it? What if you're 4 frames up? How are you going to deal with that? What if you're 4 frames behind? What's going to be your attitude? Let's prepare. Let's make some agreements here. If these things happen, this is how you're going to deal with it. But just by discussing these things before they happen pre-mortem, then they're all, it's not a surprise. It's part of the deal. We're expecting this to happen. It's no problem.
That's what I was about to say. So that creates the anticipation.
Yes.
That this may happen.
Good.
And that's very positive, Chris. Very, 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 very positive thing. And we're getting towards the end of this now. We're sort of like, I can't believe these go on so long, But I think, see, tell us. I mean, when you help a player, when you meet a new player or a player you don't know an awful lot about, what are the first things that you do? What are the first things you do with a new player?
It's happened.
Do you give them a Q&A and get feedback, or what do you do?
Well, the first thing we do is we look at the on table. There's two sides to anything. There's competence, the ability to physically do something, and then there's confidence to allow yourself to be able to do it. So the competence has to come first. On table, how effective are they? And we just check out the two majors first. Where are you striking when you think you're striking? Where are you aiming when you think you're aiming? If those two things aren't optimum, we then look at technique and mechanics and see if there's anything we could fine tune to help with that. Or is it a visual issue that they're actually not seeing the cue ball where they think they're seeing it? Because there's so many players, Dave, who will say to me, well, I'm addressing the cue ball there. And then when we actually hold the cue and let them have a look above, they're nowhere near. That's an important point, because you only really see the shot once you're down on the shot. When you're in the address position, that's where your visual cortex sees the cue ball and it sees the object ball. So we work on the two majors to start with: striking where intended, aiming where intended. Making any fine tunes technically, maybe, but it's usually more visual, to change the visual to coordinate with the current mechanic. And then I give them about 28 different shot routines, which very quickly establishes where their strengths are and where their weaknesses are. So, of course, they continue with the routines that they're strong with, but they put a little bit more time in the initial months on the routines that they're weak on. Then, of course, later comes the mental side, and we start to look at this neural rewiring process. 7-step process that anybody can do, anybody can understand. It's just a half an hour, 40 minutes a day of doing these steps, and you literally start to rewire your visual cortex, but also your belief systems, your self-belief. Because a belief, we talked about self-belief, Dave. A belief is a cluster of neurons in your brain through repetition. So you can actually trick your brain into believing anything. How about that? My sister is a doctor of clinical psychology, and she's worked with some interesting people, murderers, for example. And some of these guys get through lie tests as if they're telling the truth, because they've brainwashed themselves into believing
that is the truth.
Totally. So you can literally get yourself to believe anything you want through repetition. That's very powerful.
I always believed that I was going to marry a supermodel, Chris, but it never happened.
Did you really believe it, Dave? Did you really believe it, Dave?
Well, I thought I did at the time. But I change my mind all the time anyway, you know. It's all right. It's not bad. And so would you, Chris, would you spend a lot of time with the new players? I mean, what sort of, like, would you go into on the table? Would you spend hours with them, or how does that work?
Well, I mean, when I sign a contract with a player for the first time, the first thing that I want to see some commitment from these guys. I want to see how serious they are. So they have to come to me in this beautiful city here where I live, in Bruges, Belgium, which is not the worst place to come to.
Chris, I'm coming over. I'm coming over. I hope you've got a room for me, by the way.
And we have 2 full days together, 6 hours, 6 hours. That's the first thing that we do. And they're going to go home after those 2 days, generally with their eyes wide open and excited, because they know they're going to get the things they need to improve their game.
I'll tell you what, Chris, I've been speaking to you now for nearly 90 minutes, and I'm as excited as you can possibly be. Okay, you're more exciting than a new movie it's meant to be shown this evening. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. As soon as I get your balls, I'm going to get right down. I'm going to buy a table. I'm going to be on the table all day with those balls just to make sure I'm hitting that ball correctly. You know.
How do you fancy giving a set of these away to one of your?
We're just about to do it now. What I'm going to do, right, guys? I've left this right to the last. There's out of the 80 odd subscribers who are on there, only about 27 of you actually ask for the balls. Okay.
27.
So what I've done is I've written down 27 names on a piece of paper from 1 to 27, and Chris is going to give me a number between 1 and 27.
Okay.
And whatever number it is that comes up, I'm going to send. Chris is going to send the balls out to. Okay.
We'll need their address, email address, and telephone number.
We'll get that. And if you don't reply, then I'm just going to take the balls myself. I'll have 2 sets of balls, and I'll just hit those balls up and down the table all day, and nobody's going to get any balls. So there you go. Right. How do you want to do it? Do you want to just pick a number?
I'll do that. Yeah. Lucky for some, 13.
13.
Yeah.
Brad Harper. Oh,
Brad
Harper.
Congratulations, Brad Harper. Congratulations. The balls.
Brad Harper.
They're coming to you by DHL overnight.
Brad, text me your address in Horsham in West Sussex. I know Brad. Chris, Brad's a very good friend of mine. He's a very good. He used to be a very good snooker player. He was Sussex County champion,
right,
a long time ago when he was good. But he can't even beat me in a pro-am now. It's disgraceful, But let me tell you something, Brad.
You're a wind-up merchant, aren't you?
Listen, all he's got to do, Chris, is Brad, you've got to spend a bit of time with these balls, right? And then you'll get up to my level, okay? Just spend half a day with these balls, Chris's balls.
Just one point. Make sure you watch the videos online. Make sure you watch all the videos and get the information and the advice.
Players like Brad Harper shouldn't need to watch videos. He's Sussex County champion. Sussex County champion for many, many years. And he can't beat me in a pro-am. I mean, come on. Anyway, is there anything else, Chris, you'd like to throw in there? Don't forget, guys, Chris has got a website. It's called Chris Hendry Sport. What is it, Chris? ChrisHenrySports.com.
Yeah, the website for these balls are, as you can see, when you get these balls, you'll see a website there, which is ChrisHenrySports.com.
Right.
There's lots of stuff on there. There's actually a very interesting free shot routine that I've put up there. Everybody can get that for free, and it's worth watching because there's some interesting information there.
Hey guys, just go onto the website, have a little look at it, okay? And if you want to send a question or a message to Chris, you can do it via his email. His email will be on the website,
right?
Or just get in touch. He's available, but he's a very busy man. He's a busy man. He's right up there. He's up the top. So does he want to look after you? But at least he can send you the balls. But do you have what it takes? So what I want you to do, guys, this is starting again. I want you to give me feedback on these balls, okay? I'm going to hit a few myself when we get back into the clubs. I want a lot of feedback on the balls. Right, just to let you know who's coming up. Wednesday evening, I want you all to join in. We're going to have a chat about the Challenge Tour. Now, the whole point about the Challenge Tour feedback this Wednesday is really for the benefit of the organisers and for the benefit of you as well. So you can give your view on the format, on the different kind of things that are concerning you if you play on the Challenge Tour. I'm going to invite quite a few of you to come on a one-to-one, just like myself and Chris here today, to come on and just say a few words, and then we'll obviously upload it on YouTube, and it's there. It's not going to go anywhere, and it'll good for everybody. It'll be good for WPBSA. It'll be good for you, and it'll give everybody some new ideas. So Wednesday evening. In the meantime, I've sent some messages out to some of you. You haven't replied to me. It's just like same old thing, If you want to chat, if you're too shy, have a chat with me. Come on, you can, I'm very shy. I'm really shy. I don't know why I'm doing this here. I'm really shy. Chris told me he was shy. I was getting a bit worried, so I had to train Chris a little bit to come on here, So, he's all right. Look, he's brilliant. He did. By the way, guys, I've kept very, very quiet today. He spoke all the time. I didn't say anything. I was quiet as a mouse, Chris. I was as quiet as a mouse, and I let you do all the talking. Okay. So we got. No, we have. Right, guys. Hopefully. After that, we're going to have Ken Doherty. Ken Doherty! He's not very exciting, but he's Irish. That's why he's coming on. Okay? Ken Doherty. We're going to have maybe Neil Robertson. What a great cast he is. Fantastic. I'm going to try and get Neil on. He's thinking about it. He's a little bit shy, but I think he's okay. Give him a little bit of time to come on. So join me on Wednesday, guys. I'm going to keep Chris on here because we're going to drink a couple of bottles of wine now between now and midnight and keep each other company. He's a bit lonely out there in Bruges, so I've got to keep him company. So stay tuned. Brad, send me your address. You've won the balls. Well done.